Hi, my name's Marlene. I drove 9 hours through thunder, rain, and silence just to find my mother collapsed at the foot of the stairs, whispering, "Please, don't hurt me." She wasn't begging me. She was begging them, my stepfather and my brother. I thought she'd fallen, but what I found inside that house was a trap they'd been building for years, with my name on every document. They didn't just take her money, they used me to do it. Now I have to ask, was it really an accident she fell that night? Or had the lies finally become too heavy to carry? Before we begin, tell me, what time is it where you are? And have you ever found out a family secret that changed everything? Drop a comment. I want to hear your story too. Let's begin. The rain hadn't let up since I crossed the Illinois state line. Thick sheets of water blurred the highway, and the wipers struggled to keep up, groaning back and forth like they were tired of the same fight. 9 hours behind the wheel, and I still couldn't decide if I was angry or afraid. Probably both. I gripped the steering wheel tighter than I needed to. Not because of the slick road, but because I couldn't stop hearing her voice in my head. "It's Mom. She fell. You should come home." The neighbor had called with a shaky voice, and something about it made my gut twist. Lorraine wasn't the type to fall. She was always too careful, too controlled. The headlights cut through the storm just enough to light the sign. Hollow Ridge, 4 miles. My hometown. I hadn't said that out loud in years. It always felt like something I had to escape, not return to. But tonight, I wasn't given a choice. And maybe that's what scared me most, being dragged back to a place I swore I'd never set foot in again. Back then, when I left, I told myself I was done. I told myself I'd never be that woman who ran back home when things went wrong. But here I was, 38, single, no kids, no real ties, driving through a thunderstorm to check on the same woman who once told me, "You're too dramatic, Marlon. Learn to let things go." Funny how I remembered that sentence more clearly than her birthday. I slowed the car as I passed the old Lutheran church, its steeple half-lit by the lightning. It was almost midnight. Every turn of the tires brought memories I didn't ask for. Richard slamming a cupboard shut. David's voice echoing down the hall. Mom's silence every time I tried to speak up. The house came into view like a ghost, 2 stories of weather-worn wood and tired windows sitting just beyond a crooked fence. Some things hadn't changed. The porch light was on, like always, but this time it didn't feel warm. It felt staged. I parked behind a rusted pickup, Richard's, still here, still taking up space like he owned it all. I stepped out into the rain and felt the cold bite through my coat instantly. My boots hit the porch with a squish, and there they were, his muddy work boots by the door, pointed inward like a challenge. My hand hovered over the doorknob. Then I opened it. The house smelled like damp wood and old regret. I didn't bother calling out. I didn't want to hear my name in his voice. Not yet. Upstairs, I heard it. A sound I hadn't heard in over a decade. Crying. At first, I thought I was wrong. Maybe the wind, maybe the pipes. But no, it was real. Soft, broken sobs from a woman I barely recognized anymore. I crept toward the staircase, heart pounding harder with each step. The railing still wobbled on the 3rd step, the wallpaper still peeled by the landing. And just past the halfway mark, I saw her, my mother. She was on the floor, one leg bent unnaturally beneath her. Her hands trembled as she pressed them into the carpet, like she was trying to hold herself together. And her voice, it came out in a whisper so raw it split me in 2. "Please, don't hurt me, I can't walk." I opened my mouth to speak, but then I saw who she was looking at, not me. Richard stood just above her, looming like a shadow. Calm. Too calm. Behind him, David leaned against the hallway wall, arms crossed, jaw tight. He didn't say a word. He didn't move. My mother's eyes never shifted toward me. She didn't even know I was there. I should have rushed forward. I should have screamed his name, but I didn't. I just stood there, soaked, paralyzed, and suddenly 12 years old again. The storm outside cracked, and lightning lit the stairwell in stark white. It felt like time fractured with it. Richard finally turned toward me, like he'd just noticed I was standing there. A faint smile tugged at the corner of his mouth, just enough to let me know he wasn't surprised. "Good," he said, voice smooth like a rehearsed line. "You're here. We could use your help." I didn't move. I couldn't. My mother's breathing had gone shallow, and my throat clenched as I realized something. Whatever this was, it wasn't an accident. Not even close. I couldn't sleep that night. Every sound in the house, the wind against the siding, the ticking clock, even the faint hum of the refrigerator, felt too loud, too deliberate. I stayed on the couch, listening, waiting for something to break the silence. Nothing did. When the first light came through the curtains, the storm had passed. The air felt thick, heavy, like the house itself was holding its breath. I pushed myself up, joints stiff, and looked toward the living room. My mother was there, lying on the couch with a blanket over her legs. Her ankle was wrapped neatly in gauze, resting on a small pillow. Richard was in the kitchen, humming quietly while he poured coffee. He acted like last night never happened, like he hadn't been standing over her while she begged for mercy. David sat at the table, scrolling through his phone, the blue light from the screen flickering across his face. He didn't even glance at me. "Morning," Richard said without looking up. "Coffee's hot if you want some. Roads are a mess out there. You made it just in time before they flooded." I just nodded. The smell of coffee was sharp and bitter. My mother stirred slightly, opening her eyes. When she saw me, she smiled, too quickly, too rehearsed. "Oh, sweetheart, you're still here," she said, her voice warm but trembling. "I must have scared you last night. I'm such a klutz." I stared at her ankle. The bruise was spreading beneath the bandage, dark purple against pale skin. "You fell?" I asked, my voice low. She nodded, looking down at her hands. "Yes, I tripped on the last step. I should have turned the light on." Richard chuckled softly. "I told her that rug's a death trap. I was right there, helped her up myself." He sipped his coffee, watching me over the rim of the cup. "We just didn't want you to panic, Marlon. You've always had a tendency to overreact, like before." The way he said those two words, like before, made my throat tighten. I looked at my mother. She didn't meet my eyes. "Before?" I repeated quietly. "You mean the last time I called out your behavior?" His smile didn't move, but his tone sharpened just a little. "I mean the last time you misunderstood things and caused a scene." The room felt smaller. I sat down at the edge of the armchair, my palms damp against the fabric. The sound of David's phone tapping filled the space like static. I wanted to scream. Instead, I swallowed the words that rose in my chest. I'd done this before, this performance of pretending, this quiet compliance. It felt like stepping into an old costume I swore I'd burned. The memory came uninvited. Christmas Eve, 12 years ago. The smell of pine needles, laughter that wasn't real, the look on Richard's face when I told him I knew he'd been controlling Mom's every move, the denial, the gaslighting, the way everyone turned on me within seconds. "Marlon," David had said back then, "you always make things worse." And Mom, sweet, fragile Mom, had whispered, "He's just trying to help, dear. You're overreacting." That was the night I left, and I never came back until now. The clink of a spoon in a cup pulled me back. Richard was still talking, something about needing to replace the gutters. David was laughing at a video on his phone, and my mother was pretending not to wince when she shifted her leg. I stood and walked toward the kitchen, trying to keep my breathing steady. "Where's the first aid kit?" I asked, more to break the silence than anything. "Cabinet above the stove," Richard said. His tone was casual, but when I reached for the cabinet, I caught his reflection in the window, watching me. I found the kit, set it on the counter, and that's when I noticed it, his smartwatch, face cracked, sitting next to the sugar jar. There was a faint red light blinking in the corner of the screen. Recording. A chill ran through me. My fingers hovered over it for a second, then I picked it up, flipping it over. There was a small hole on the side, barely visible. I remembered that sound from last night. The faint ticking, rhythmic and steady, like a heartbeat. I slipped the watch into my pocket and zipped it shut. When I turned around, my mother was awake again. Her eyes darted toward my hand, then to the kitchen door. I crossed the room and sat beside her. She smiled, but her lips trembled. "Please don't start anything," she whispered. "You'll only make it worse." "Mom, he hurt you." She shook her head quickly. "He didn't mean to. You don't understand. He just loses his temper sometimes. But he's been good to me. He takes care of things." "Things like what?" I asked, my voice breaking despite myself. "Bills, the house, my medication. He means well." Her fingers tightened around mine. "Don't make this worse. You've always been dramatic, honey." The words hit like a slap, because I'd heard them before, from him. I looked down at her hand gripping mine. Her knuckles were white. I wanted to pull away, but something in her eyes, fear, confusion, loyalty, made me stay still. Footsteps echoed behind me. Richard's voice came smooth and calm, cutting through the quiet. "Marlene," he said, "why don't you stay a few days? Family should stick together." I turned slowly. His eyes flicked down toward my pocket, then back up to my face. A hint of amusement danced at the edge of his smile. It was like he already knew. His eyes stayed on me as he said it, softly, like a compliment that carried a threat. "You always had a way of making trouble sound noble." Then he turned away, the sound of his footsteps echoing down the hallway, slow and deliberate. The silence that followed felt heavier than anything he could have said. I stood there for a long time, feeling the weight of every second settle in my chest. The house was still, but it wasn't quiet. There was something about the air, too thick, too dense, like the walls themselves were holding their breath, remembering every argument, every bruise, every lie ever told inside them. I started walking down the hall. The wood creaked beneath my feet, same as it always had, only now it felt like the house was reacting to me. The wallpaper, once floral, had faded to a dull yellow. Every frame hung slightly crooked, and I found myself fixing them as I passed, an old habit from when I was a kid, trying to make chaos look neat. When I reached the staircase, I stopped. The banister had new scratches, fresh ones, thin and deep, the kind that don't come from age, but from a struggle. I crouched down, tracing them with my fingertips. The air smelled faintly of metal, sharp and unmistakable. Blood. I looked up the stairs where she'd fallen. The carpet fibers were still flattened in one spot, darker than the rest. I could almost hear it again. Her voice, the pleading tone I couldn't unhear. A frame lay face down under the bottom step. I bent to pick it up, wiping dust from the glass. It was a picture of them, Mom, Richard, and David, smiling in front of the house. My own face had been cut off by the edge, like someone cropped me out on purpose. When I turned it over, a smear of dried blood streaked the wooden edge. Not old, not from 12 years ago. I held the frame tighter. My pulse thudded in my ears. "Something wrong?" Richard's voice came from behind me, smooth, calm, like he'd been standing there for a while. I straightened, hiding the back of the frame against my leg. "This was on the floor," I said. He shrugged, stepping closer, coffee mug in hand. Your mother must have knocked it down when she fell. Maybe cut herself on the glass. There's blood behind it, I said quietly. He took a sip, unbothered. Then it must be hers. Don't go imagining ghosts again, Marlon. I froze. Again? He smiled faintly. You always see what you want to see. It's what makes you passionate, but also unreliable. David appeared at the top of the stairs, barefoot, arms crossed. You always make things worse, he said flatly, repeating the line like a family motto. Just leave it alone, Mom's fine. I didn't respond, because I knew if I did, my voice would shake. Later that night, after dinner no one really ate, I sat in my old room. The walls were still painted pale blue, though the corners had turned gray with time. I heard soft footsteps outside the door, then a quiet knock. When I opened it, my mother stood there, clutching her robe at the collar. She looked smaller somehow. Her voice trembled when she spoke. He didn't mean to push me, she whispered. He just got angry. You know how he gets when things don't go his way. I stared at her, searching her face for the woman I remembered, the one who used to brush my hair before school, who told me to be brave. Then why was there blood behind the frame? I asked. She flinched. Her eyes darted toward the stairs, then back to me. Don't dig, Marlene. The truth never helped anyone in this house. Mom! But she was already turning away. The door closed with a soft click, and her footsteps faded down the hall. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the floor. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. When I was 10, I stood at that same staircase, holding a half-finished blue scarf in my hands, while I listened to her cry behind closed doors. Back then, I didn't understand what fear looked like. I thought it was something that lived outside the house. But now I realized it had always lived here. It had grown here. That scarf was still in her dresser drawer. I saw it earlier when I unpacked my bag. Same color, same stitches, same memory attached to it like a curse. I don't know how long I sat there before I heard it, the faint clicking sound. At first, I thought it was the watch I'd taken from Richard, but I'd left that on the dresser. The noise wasn't coming from there. It was coming from the wall. Tick, pause, tick. I moved closer, pressing my ear against the drywall. The sound was rhythmic, deliberate. I followed it across the room to where the paint looked slightly uneven. My heart pounded so hard I could feel it in my throat. The sound was behind the plaster, steady and mechanical, like a hidden heartbeat. I whispered to myself, "You've got to be kidding me." The walls were watching. I didn't think. I just followed it, the sound, the rhythm, the pulse. It guided me like a thread I didn't know I was holding until I realized I couldn't let go. The hallway was darker now, the storm outside long gone, but leaving behind a dampness that settled into the walls. I crept past the living room, past the photos with smiling faces that no longer looked familiar, until I stood in front of the basement door. I'd forgotten how much I hated that door. Always locked, always off limits. Richard used to call it unsafe, said the steps were weak, the wiring exposed. Nothing down there worth the trouble, he told me once, when I was 16 and asked why it was always locked. But now the ticking came from behind it, soft and steady like shallow breathing. The key was easy enough to find. It hung in plain sight on the hook by the kitchen, marked utility, like a cruel little joke. My hand hesitated as I reached for it. Not because I was scared, though I was, but because I knew once I turned that key, I'd never see this house the same way again. The lock clicked louder than I expected. I cracked the door open and a draft met me, a cold breath from below. The air smelled metallic and old, like rusted tools and secrets. I flicked on the light switch, but all it did was flicker once before dying. I grabbed the flashlight from the wall cabinet, the one we used during power outages, and began my descent. The wooden steps groaned under my weight, each one moaning in protest, as if trying to warn me. I counted them without meaning to. 11, 12, 13. The last one dipped slightly under my foot, and I reached the concrete floor. It wasn't what I expected. No washer or dryer, no tools. Just a long table against the far wall, cluttered with wires, old headphones, dusty memory cards, and cassette tapes stacked like bricks. A single bulb above the table flickered faintly, casting shadows that danced when I moved. The tapes were labeled with dates, years of them. Some went as far back as 2007. Others just had initials. LS, my mother, DR, David. MA, my name. My chest tightened. I picked up the first cassette I saw. It was labeled Oct 18, LS. I turned it in my hand, found the old recorder already on the table. My fingers shook as I pressed play. Static. Then, I'm sorry. Please don't tell her. Please, I didn't mean to. Then a man's voice. Quiet. Calm. She doesn't need to know. You know how she gets. Then my name. My mother's voice again. Marlene can't help. She never could. I dropped the recorder. The sound cut off as it hit the floor, but her voice still echoed in my mind. Not just the words, but the tone. Broken, resigned, the same voice I heard on the staircase. He'd been recording her. All of her. For years. I grabbed a few more tapes, fumbling now. Some were marked private, others just had dates and times. I didn't need to listen. I already knew. This wasn't paranoia. This wasn't just a fall. This was years of control, documented and stored in plain sight. My stomach turned. I backed away from the table, and that's when I saw the folder. Thick, overstuffed, marked LS. I opened it. Typed transcripts, emails, voice recordings. Some printed from what looked like a transcription software, time-stamped with dates and tagged with notes. Emotional peak. Apology sequence. Verbal escalation. Underneath that file was a thinner one, labeled MA. I opened it and saw my own emails, things I hadn't seen in years, messages I'd written but deleted, phone logs, screenshots of social media posts, photos I hadn't posted. He'd tracked me, even after I left. I couldn't breathe for a moment, not just because it was terrifying, but because of the weight of knowing. I hadn't escaped. I was never out of his reach. He had been watching me like he watched her. A memory hit me like a cold slap. I was 15, home from school early one day, and I saw a small red light blinking near the corner of my ceiling. I'd asked Richard what it was. He smiled and said, "Smoke detector. Cheap one. Ignore it." Now I knew better. That was the first camera. That was where it started. Suddenly, I heard movement upstairs. The floorboards creaked above me. Someone was pacing. Then his voice, casual and cold. "You shouldn't be down there, Marlon." I froze. He was right above me. You never did learn when to leave things alone. I clutched the folder to my chest. My heart beat against it, hard enough to make my arms shake. I looked at the light bulb overhead, still flickering, still casting just enough light to show every wire, every dirty secret. I reached for the switch near the stairs and turned it off. Darkness swallowed the room, and in that darkness, I whispered, "Not this time." The ticking stopped. He didn't know what I had. Not yet. I walked back upstairs holding the file, my hands shaking, but my voice steady for the first time in years. The house was still, caught between night and dawn. A thin mist crept through the windows, painting everything in shades of blue-gray. I sat at the kitchen table and laid the folder down. My fingers left small damp marks on the cover. The clock above the stove ticked softly, steady and indifferent. The smell of burnt toast drifted through the air. The kind of smell that shouldn't mean anything, but somehow felt like home. My mother was already up. She moved slowly, favoring her injured leg, her robe tied loosely around her waist. Couldn't sleep? She asked, voice hoarse from the night before. Something like that, I said. She poured herself coffee, the mug clinking against the counter. Her eyes were red, her face calm in that strange, practiced way. Years of pretending had made her an expert at this, keeping her world neat while it crumbled underneath. I pushed the folder toward her. You don't have to lie for him anymore. Her hand froze midair. She didn't look at it right away. She took a long sip of coffee, as if she hadn't heard me. Then, without meeting my eyes, she whispered, "You went down there." "Yes," I said. "I found everything, the recordings, the files, the notes." She placed the mug on the table gently. For a second, her lips trembled. Then she took a deep breath and said, "He didn't mean to. I made him angry. I shouldn't have said what I said." My stomach tightened. "Mom," I said quietly, "that's not how this works." She looked at me then, really looked at me. Her expression was soft, almost pitying. "You think this is something new, that you can just fix it by exposing him? This isn't normal," I snapped. "This isn't love. You didn't deserve any of it." Her eyes filled with tears, but her voice stayed even. "You're wrong. I said something cruel. I told him he was turning into his father. I knew better than to say that." Her words hit like cold rain. This wasn't denial anymore. It was belief. She had learned to see pain as her penance, submission as survival. I sat back, watching her. The woman I'd driven 9 hours for wasn't just hurt. She was trained to protect the person who broke her. She rubbed her hands together nervously, staring into the cup. "You don't understand," she whispered. "It's always been like this. Even before Richard, my father. He used to get angry too. He'd throw things. My mother would tell me to stay quiet, to never provoke him. I thought when I married again, I'd find peace. But men—" She stopped herself, then exhaled shakily. "Men just need control to feel safe." Her voice cracked. "David knows. He's helped me hide the bruises before." I froze. "What?" She nodded slowly. "It's not his fault. He's trying to keep the peace. He always has. He covers for Richard when he loses his temper. Sometimes he tells me to rest in the bedroom until things calm down." I pushed my chair back so fast, it screeched across the floor. He knew this was happening?" Her voice barely rose above a whisper. "He's just trying to protect what's left of this family." I stared at her. The same woman who once told me to fight for what's right, who packed my bags when I left for college, whispering, "Go make a life you can be proud of." And now, she was defending the people who caged her. Something inside me cracked. "When I was 17, I said slowly, "I came to David after Richard screamed at you. You were crying in the kitchen, and I didn't know what to do. I told him we had to call someone. Do you know what he told me?" She didn't answer. He said, "You don't know him like we do. Just let Mom handle it." My throat burned. And I believed him. I thought silence was love. I thought protecting you meant pretending nothing was wrong. But all it did was give him permission. She started to cry quietly, shoulders shaking. "Marlon," she said, "if you leave again, you'll lose everything." I stood, gripping the table's edge. "If I stay, I'll lose myself." For the first time in years, my voice didn't shake. She covered her face with her hands. I wanted to comfort her, to kneel beside her, hold her, tell her she wasn't alone. But I couldn't. Not anymore. Love shouldn't cost this much. I turned toward the living room. The blue scarf, the one she'd started knitting years ago, was still draped across the armchair, half finished, unraveling at one end. I picked it up, folded it carefully, and placed it beside her on the table. "I don't hate you," I said softly, "but I can't keep loving you this way." The words hung between us like the smoke from the burnt toast, lingering, heavy, impossible to ignore. I walked toward the front door, the floor creaking beneath each step. The air outside was cool and damp, the kind that sticks to your skin. Mist rose from the fields, curling around the porch rails. As I reached for my car keys, my phone buzzed in my pocket. Unknown number. The message was short. "You think you know the truth? Check your car." I froze. The driveway glistened with dew. My car sat under the oak tree, just where I left it. The engine was still damp from the storm. I opened the trunk slowly, half expecting nothing, half expecting too much. Inside was a plain white envelope, my name written on it in blue ink. I tore it open with shaking hands. A small flash drive slid into my palm. The label read, "For you." The flash drive was cold in my hand, colder than the morning air, colder than the silence that had settled over our house like mildew. I sat in the driver's seat, engine off, windshield misted in a thin film of dew. The birds had just started their tired morning songs, but it felt like the world hadn't fully woken up yet. I plugged the flash drive into my laptop. My fingers shook as I waited for it to load. Folders popped up almost instantly, each one labeled like a bank vault. Accounts, insurance, property, and date ranges that stretched back 7 years. My breath caught in my throat. I clicked on property first. A list of files unspooled down the screen. I opened one. A scanned document filled the screen. A title that made my stomach clench. Transfer of ownership. Avon Family Property. And there it was. My name, M. Avon. Only, I never signed this. The signature was neat, perfectly matched. I knew because it was mine, digitally scanned, identical to the one I scribbled on that routine insurance form Richard handed me the summer before I left for Chicago. I remembered that moment vividly now. Him standing over me, warm smile, saying, "Just some paperwork, nothing major." God, he'd been planning this that far back. Each document told the same story. Slow, careful transfers of my mother's accounts and assets into holding companies with Richard's name buried in the paperwork. But what chilled me wasn't just the theft. It was how clean it all looked. Legal, sanitized. And then I found a folder named Help from David. I clicked it, half hoping it would be empty. It wasn't. Every file inside bore the same initials at the bottom right corner, DA-scanned PDFs of affidavits, witness statements, notarized forms, property records. Some were typed, some were hand-scrawled in my brother's messy printing. I blinked hard, hoping I was wrong, hoping my brain had blurred something out of place. But it was there, clear as day. David hadn't just known. He'd helped. The chair squeaked beneath me as I leaned back, air caught somewhere in my lungs. I rubbed my hands together, trying to stop the trembling. I felt like a fool. Worse, I felt like a daughter whose brother had sold out the only real thing holding our family together. Trust. I needed air, or maybe just distance. I started the car, the engine coughing to life. I didn't know where I was driving, only that I had to move. Asphalt hummed beneath the tires. Cornfields blurred past in soft gold and green. I didn't look back at the house. I couldn't. About 20 minutes down the road, I spotted an old roadside diner called Harper's Place. The sign was crooked, one bulb flickering. It looked like it hadn't changed in 40 years. I pulled in. Inside smelled like burned coffee and bacon grease, the kind of place where you don't have to smile if you don't want to. I slid into a booth by the window, laptop still open beside me. The flash drive rested next to my cup like a loaded gun. A waitress with silver hair and kind eyes came over. "Refill?" she asked gently. I nodded. She looked at the file on the table and then back at me. "You all right, hun?" "No," I said honestly, "but I'm done pretending I am." She didn't ask more, just poured the coffee and gave my shoulder a squeeze. I stared out the window, watching the fog thin above the fields. My head was spinning with 100 thoughts and one question I couldn't shake. What do I do with this? If I went to the police, everything came out. Mom's bruises, Richard's fraud, David's betrayal. Lorraine could lose the house. Everything could unravel. But if I kept it to myself, I'd be exactly what they expected me to be: silent, passive, gone. The waitress passed by again, offering more coffee. I shook my head. My stomach churned with acid and anger. He'd built a prison out of love. That thought settled heavy in my chest. Not chains, not bars, just guilt and silence. And people like my mother and brother, caught in a web they'd learned to call normal. I turned the laptop back toward me and copied the files from the flash drive to my cloud drive, then to a second USB. I wasn't going to lose this, not now. As I closed the laptop, my phone buzzed again. Unknown number. Meet me at the lawyer's office tomorrow. Bring the drive. D. David. I blinked. Then I checked the timestamp. Sent 2 hours ago. 2 hours ago, before I ever opened the trunk. Before I even knew the flash drive existed. My skin went cold. That meant one thing. Someone else knew where the flash drive was. Someone who wanted me to find it. And David was part of it, whether he admitted it or not. I stared at the message until the screen dimmed. Someone was watching me, and they were done waiting. I drove toward town with one thought pounding in my head. If he knew about the drive before I did, then he's still watching. The sky had darkened to a muddy gray, the kind that made everything look like it was fading at the edges. By the time I parked in front of Benjamin Keir's law office, the drizzle had turned into a steady patter on the windshield. I sat there for a moment, breathing through the nerves that gripped my chest like a seatbelt pulled too tight. The office was tucked between a barber shop and a shuttered florist, one of those old buildings where the blinds are always half closed and the lettering on the glass door is faded from too many summers. The sign still read, Keir and Associates, though I doubted there were any associates left. Inside, the place smelled like old carpet and toner ink. A secretary looked up from behind the desk with a smile that felt rehearsed, too smooth. "Afternoon," she said, too cheerily. "You must be Marlene." I nodded. "Mr. Keir is expecting you." She gestured toward the door to the left. "Go right in." The knob was cold in my hand. I pushed it open. Benjamin Keir stood as I entered, wearing a beige suit that matched the walls. His handshake lingered just a bit too long, his eyes holding mine with a little too much interest. "Well, well," he said, motioning for me to sit. "It's been a while since we've seen an Avon name in here." I sat, setting the flash drive gently on the edge of his desk like a challenge. He didn't waste time. He plugged it in and started clicking through files without asking me a word, like he already knew what he'd find. "You shouldn't have this, Marlene," he said without looking up. "It's private property." My spine stiffened. Whose property exactly? He finally looked at me, his expression unreadable. "That's not really the point, is it?" There was a pause, thick and still. I could hear the faint buzzing of the fluorescent light above. I knew then this whole meeting was staged, a setup. He wasn't here to help, he was here to shut me down. I stood up. That drive was in my trunk. No one's supposed to know it exists. And yet, here we are. Benjamin closed the laptop slowly. "Richard's worried about you. He wants this to stop before it becomes complicated." "Complicated for who?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. "Because I'm fine. It's your client who's nervous." His smile cracked, just barely. "You've always been a little dramatic, haven't you?" Behind me, the click of a lock sliding into place made the room feel suddenly smaller. "You don't need to be here," he continued, tone now clipped. "Just sign this waiver and walk away. No one wants a messy legal fight. He slid a form across the desk. Waiver of possession, the top line read. But my eyes caught something else. Down near the bottom, in smaller print than anything else on the page, transfer of title, property held in trust under Emser Aven, original owner. I stared. The memory returned like a bolt. Me at 25, nervously wiring the down payment to secure the house before Mom and Richard even got married. At the time, it was supposed to be a gift, a fresh start for her, and they never changed the title. My name was still on it. I blinked, then slowly reached for the pen. But instead of signing my name, I scribbled something else. David Avon. When I stood, I slid the form back toward him and smiled. You can tell Richard I finally signed something for him. Benjamin's lips parted slightly. He hadn't expected that. I snapped a photo of the document with my phone before he could react, then turned to leave. You don't know what you've started, he said as I opened the door. No, I said over my shoulder, but I know how it ends. The drizzle outside felt colder than before, but somehow less invasive. I paused at the glass door, catching my reflection. My hair was pulled back messily, dark circles under my eyes, but there was something else there now, steel. I whispered to my reflection, I see you now, Dad. Not Richard, my real father. The one who disappeared under the weight of silence. I wasn't going to repeat his story. Just as I reached my car, my phone buzzed. A video message, no subject, no sender name. I tapped it. Lorraine's voice came through shaky and panicked. They know what you did. Don't come home. In the background, through the dim light, I could see her. Her eyes red, frightened. And behind her, a shadow moving across the hallway. It was Richard. I drove faster than I ever had before, the folder still on the passenger seat, my mother's voice echoing in my head. Her words didn't feel like a warning, they felt like a plea. And beneath that, guilt. The rain thickened as I turned onto the gravel drive, headlights bouncing off the wet sheen of the pavement. The front door was wide open, not cracked, hanging there like someone left in a hurry or didn't care who walked in. The porch light flickered. I killed the engine and sat for a second, hand frozen on the door handle. Then I stepped out. Wind caught my jacket, whipping it around me. The screen door creaked against its hinges, rattling like it might tear loose any second. I pushed into the house. The living room was dark save for the dim yellow glow from the hallway. The walls breathed with shadows. At the top of the stairs stood David. You shouldn't have gone to Keir, he said quietly. His tone was flat, like a warning disguised as conversation. I didn't answer, just walked toward the stairs and started climbing, one slow step at a time. I know what you did, I said. You signed my name. You drained her account. David looked away, jaw clenched. You don't understand, Marlene. It wasn't like that. Then tell me, I snapped, because from where I'm standing, it looks exactly like betrayal. He hesitated, and then, like something cracked open inside him, he said it. He recorded me. Years ago. I was stupid. College party. Things got out of hand. He kept the footage. I stopped mid-step. My heart hammered. Not with anger this time, but realization. You helped him out of fear? I thought if I cooperated, he'd delete it. I thought I was protecting you, and Mom. My knees felt weak. This wasn't about loyalty or greed. It was blackmail. We'd all been pawns. He owns everyone in this house, I murmured. David didn't respond. He didn't have to. That's when I heard the soft shuffle of slippers on the hardwood. Lorraine! She came into view at the end of the hallway, wearing her robe. Her hair was pulled back, and her eyes, once always avoiding mine, met me dead on. Stop yelling, she said. Not a plea. A command, but I didn't stop. I turned toward her and asked, You knew. Silence. You knew everything, the signatures, the surveillance, the money. Still, she didn't deny it. I let him do it, she said finally, voice thin. I knew what it cost, but I needed this family to hold together. Even if it meant breaking me. I felt something rip inside, not sudden, not loud. A quiet tearing that only I could feel. You stood there. You watched him crush all of us, and you chose to protect him. She didn't argue. My voice dropped. You threw me to the wolves so you could keep pretending this house wasn't burning down. Behind me, another presence stepped forward. Richard, calm, measured, as always. I built this family, he said. I turned to face him, cold spreading through my chest. No, you built a cage. He raised a brow. Careful. I pulled out my phone, thumb hovering, then pressing play. The room filled with static, then my mother's voice, crying, begging. Richard shouting in the background. David's voice, shaky, echoing off basement walls. No one moved, no one breathed. Lorraine sank to the floor. Richard reached for the phone, but I stepped back, hand raised. Touch me again and you'll hear yourself in court. His jaw flexed, but he didn't come closer. The audio kept playing, truth unraveling in digital threads. Then, like something out of a nightmare, he lunged. David, surprisingly fast, stepped between us, pushing Richard back. In the scuffle, Lorraine tried to stand, to stop them maybe, but her foot slipped. She fell, hard, her back hitting the stair edge with a dull thud. Silence. I moved to her, kneeling. Her eyes blinked slowly, unfocused. David stood frozen. Richard stepped back like a man who suddenly saw the room around him for the first time. It ends here, I whispered. No one argued, not this time. The storm outside finally broke, but inside the house, everything had already fallen apart. The rain had stopped by the time the flashing lights filled our gravel driveway. Red and blue shimmered off wet siding and broken windows. Paramedics moved quickly, but not in a rush, the kind of motion that comes from practiced calm after chaos. The kind they use when they know the worst is already over. I stood barefoot on the porch, drenched and shivering. Not from cold, from whatever comes after rage, the hollow space it leaves behind. Richard didn't say a word as they handcuffed him. His face was pale, distant, like he still hadn't caught up to what just happened. His eyes met mine for a brief second, not pleading, not angry, just gone. They passed me on the way to the ambulance, wheeling Lorraine out on a stretcher. Her voice barely broke above the wind. I told you not to come home. I nodded, brushing wet hair out of my face. Maybe that's why I had to. 2 days later, I sat in the corner of a bland hospital room. Beige walls, dim light, the smell of disinfectant trying too hard to mask something deeper. Lorraine lay in the bed, propped up, a brace covering most of her lower body. They said I won't walk again, she murmured, eyes on the ceiling. I didn't speak right away, just watched her. I remembered the way she used to stand tall when I was little, how she moved through the kitchen like she was floating. That version of her felt lifetimes ago. She looked toward me, her voice smaller. He's gone. They're taking him away, for good this time. I nodded again. The silence between us wasn't sharp now. It was heavy, sure, but it wasn't cruel. You don't have to explain anymore, I said gently. I finally understand. Her hand twitched under the blanket. She fumbled a little, then pulled something out and held it toward me. The blue scarf. Still half knit, loops tangled and uneven. The yarn looked older now, frayed at the edges. I never stopped making it, she whispered. I reached out and took it. My fingers slid along the stitches. Some were neat, some loose, some nearly undone. I'll finish it, I said. She didn't smile, but something in her face softened. That afternoon, a detective stopped by my motel room just outside town. He didn't sit, just stood by the door like he had somewhere else to be. We pulled Richard's records. Your flash drive led us to a whole mess of buried claims, forged insurance policies, fake consulting fees. Not just your mom. At least 3 other families in town. My chest tightened, but not from surprise. You did the right thing, he added. I shook my head. No, I did the hard thing. He paused. Sometimes they're the same. By the end of the week, I was back on the road. The rain had come and gone again, leaving behind the scent of wet cornfields and early fall. As I drove back toward Illinois, past old barns and rusted silos, I kept thinking about the night I first pulled into that driveway. Lorraine's voice trembling, telling me not to hurt her. Back then, I thought she meant physical pain. Now I knew better. She wasn't afraid of bruises. She was afraid of truth, of what truth would tear down. Each mile I drove felt lighter. I stopped for gas near the state line. The sky had cleared. Birds chirped somewhere out of sight. A cool breeze brushed across my arms. My phone buzzed. One new voicemail. From David. His voice cracked as it played. I'm sorry, Marlene. I told them everything. I know it's not enough, but I hope one day you'll forgive me. I listened once. That was all I needed. Then I hit delete. Not out of spite, not even anger, because I was done carrying what wasn't mine anymore. A few weeks later, I was sitting in my apartment back in Springfield, needle in hand, the half-knit scarf stretched across my lap. The TV was off. The city buzzed outside my window, but inside everything was still. Loop by loop, I finished the scarf. The yarn tugged softly between my fingers, just like it had when I was a girl watching her mother try to make sense of the world with nothing but string and silence. When I was done, I stood up and wrapped it around my neck. The mirror caught my reflection. Not the version of me that had left years ago. Not the woman who ran, but the one who stayed, who faced it. You can rest now, Mom, I whispered. And for the first time in a long time, the face in the glass smiled back. Sometimes silence isn't peace. It's the weight that keeps us from speaking our truth. And when you finally break it, the storm isn't what destroys you. It's what sets you free.